Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the No Ego Podcast. And I know so many of you have been asking, Sai, when are you coming off this prolonged sabbatical and talking to us again in the form of a podcast? And I'm doing that, and I'm bringing to you some of my favorite people that are on similar journeys as I am. We're not going to talk a ton about work. We may talk about leadership, but we're going to talk about life. And I just want to bring you as many data points as possible of things to consider. I want to make some invitations to all of you listeners as you come off of COVID, if we ever come off of COVID, and you have been faced with some self-examination and self-reflection. I want to help you make sense of what just happened and how we can integrate that. So I've reached out to some of my favorite people, most of whom I've never met, but people that I followed on Instagram and TED Talks and LinkedIn and Facebook over my COVID time, and just found lovely invitations and bits of knowledge that they have. And it's with that I am bringing you my guest today, Robert Pardi. And Robert's work is fantastic. He's a life coach. He's an author. He's a beautiful asker of questions. And you all know how I preach that if you want better answers in life, you got to ask better questions. So his book, Possibility in Action, was just, it's scrumptious. And I'll let him tell you about it. But he is currently living life in Italy. And I just want to say, welcome, Robert, and thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm sure that introduction did not do you justice, but we're just getting to know one another.
We are, and I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to be here. One, because I love your work, I love your show, I love the TED Talk that you had, and this to me is really absolutely fantastic.
You are working right now in the world of how to take possibilities and bring them into action. But I would love to start a little bit farther back because there's so many experiences that you have allowed to shape you. Now, we all grow older. Some of us don't always grow wiser. We have to forge that wisdom. We all go through tough things, but whether we're traumatized or evolved by them, gets to be with how we dance with those tough things. And one of the things I admire most about you is you've been through tough things and you have worked hard to evolve from them. So tell our listeners just a bit about some of your most evolutionary invitations.
Sure. I love that you use the word invitations, by the way. You know, when I was younger, I definitely, of course, they didn't sound like invitations. In a way, though, I learned very early on about admiration. And I think that had a lot to do with how I sort of dealt with everything. So, an Italian American kid born in the Bronx, New York, and grew up with an abusive alcoholic dad. So, from a
Which
very
feels like such a big ripoff rather than the invitation. And it was kind of a ripoff.
Well, it was to a certain extent, but I have to say, I realized the value of it pretty early on. I did lose out on certain things for sure. You know, I didn't have the traditional childhood and people weren't allowed over to come and play with me at my house and things like that. But, you know, there were a few things that it invited me to contemplate. And it's very funny because I did contemplate as a kid. I did try to figure things out. And why wasn't I liked? Or why would this happen? And then there came a point in time where I just became angry. And anger is a fuel. It can definitely move you forward. It's not sustainable. But I finally, at one point in time, defended myself. And that was really the defining point because it was at that moment I realized my dad was a bully because the moment I could defend myself, he didn't approach me again. He was still an alcoholic, but at least the attack, I don't want to say attacks because it's not like he was crazy attacking, but you know, the abuse, let's say, stopped. And I realized then how important it was to, let's say, have boundaries. I couldn't have defined them as boundaries back then, right? But I wasn't
Right.
going to stand for certain things. And it built a lot of skills in me. But, that was part of what that did, was the anger and everything to get away. I went into finance. I became an investment banker. That was, I was like, I'm going to make money. I grew up in the
I'm
80s.
going
So,
to achieve so many of us that come out of families. Achievement is like how we're going to redeem ourselves. Love and achievement. I'm going to find someone that loves me to prove I'm not worthless, and I'm going to achieve to prove that I'm worthy. I want to just
yeah,
mark something on boundaries,
sure.
because I'm usually working myself or with others on people that have needed or have been more passive. And then when they first come out with boundaries, it is like from anger, and it's big and it's messy. And then we usually shame ourselves back into no boundaries. And we've oscillate between few
Yeah,
boundaries. And one of the things I think is so important about anger is fuel. Most valuable piece of anger is sit with your anger until it tells you its name. So when you have that rage, like sit, and I'm not talking for a minute, and I'm not talking for 10 minutes, sit with that anger until it tells you all of its names. Lack of boundaries, powerlessness, because our boundaries aren't just our final non-negotiables. There are limits, early warning signs, but they're also our desires and preferences. And if you grow
yes,
up in families of origin, like many of us grew up in, like we never even dreamt about having preferences or desires. Even limits were always challenged. And so we had a few non-negotiables that we finally expressed. But if you go out to live life with non-negotiables, you are living continuously in a reaction of things. I need to find love, which won't ever redeem you. And I need to find achievement, which will never redeem you. And that's where our midlife crises come from, right? Is when we
yeah,
played by the rules, we did all these things, and we weren't redeemed.
yeah,
And in our adult life, we can't fix childhood stuff with adult um, relationship. We just can't. That's our inner work that we bring as a partner to relationships. So I just wanted to mark that for my listeners. So you go out and if you're the Bronx, you're not a Yankees fan, right? You're on the other side of the.
no, no, no. I was actually a Yankees fan, but I
Okay.
was born. I was born in the Bronx.
Okay. So we
But
can
yeah, I wound
continue
up.
this
Yeah.
interview.
So yeah, no problem at all. Uh, but it was interesting. So part of, let's say, boundaries for me was understanding my worth, understanding that it's my life, and there were definitely some, let's say, non-negotiables, which I carried forward, and I'd be more than happy to share. Um, but I had this thing of I was going to do it all on my own, and I'm in university, you know, studying economics, and I meet this firecracker of a woman, a 17-year-old woman, and she basically like puts me in my spot. And we're talking, and I'm like, yeah, no, I want to go live on a deserted island or something. I'm never going to get married. No, I don't, because I didn't, what I saw,
Well,
I didn't
extreme
want.
independence is a pretty common reaction.
Yeah. And you know what? No, that didn't happen.
You broke
So
through that. I love that.
yeah, my wife and I, her name was Desiree, and we had the most remarkable relationship. And I think it was because we spoke. We were never, and I don't know where that actually came from. And I think part of it was in everything that I saw within my life, and with my dad. For example, my dad would hit me, and my mom would ask me to go apologize to him for making him angry, right? And there was no discussion between the two of them about a lot of things. And somewhere along the line, I just decided I have a voice. I'm just going to say what I think. And she was pretty much the same way. So we would call each other out on things that were happening in the relationship, even though we were kids, right? And
I love that. Use your voice. So
yeah,
many of us go through life not speaking up, and things get so confrontational because we're never conversational about it. If you can be conversational, you hardly ever have to get confrontational. But
rotational.
this whole thing of they should know or read my mind, or it's a character flaw on them that, they aren't giving me this thing I haven't asked for. When I was a counselor, I would say, what do you need from your spouse? Well, I want him or her to say, I love you more often. And I'm like, so you want to know if you're loved? Why don't you just ask them, honey, do you love me? I'm feeling right now like I need affirmation. And people would say, well, if I have to ask for it, it doesn't count.
Yes.
It's like, that's just a less than ideal or less than mature way to move through the world. So I hope you don't mind when I stop you. Just a mark for our listeners, these just beautiful nuggets of invitation. Where reflect today, where haven't you used your voice and been chronically disappointed? And what a setup that is for somebody else to not even be able to adjust. And where, when somebody uses their voice, do you come out protecting or defending rather than just taking in the message their voice is carrying to you?
You know, I am. I've worked with a bunch of people on something similar to this about voice, and a lot of times people are afraid to speak what they think because they're afraid they'll lose the person. And I always get them to the point of, well, if the person isn't giving you what you need and you're not speaking up about that, what relationship do you really have?
Right. And if you have the person, it's based on false premises.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to lose the person, but do you really have a relationship with the person? Because they're having a relationship with who you're pretending to be, not who you really are. And that's the setup. Then we never feel loved enough or seen enough. And it's because we haven't taken the risk to be seen. There's nothing more cathartic than taking the risk to speak your voice and having someone stay. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where it just goes deeper. And that listening, people on the other side of this, if you want your people around you to speak their voice, I recently in meditation had something come to me and it said, why don't you listen to what people are carrying on their voice like you would listen to music? Like flute music. It's like, I don't love it yet, but I'm with great anticipation and I'm just going to let it unfold. And I'm listening for like when something else is coming in here. But oftentimes we don't listen to people, what they're carrying on their voice, like music that's carried through an instrument.
Yeah.
We listen to it as personalities.
And Desiree and I, it's not necessarily that we would say, we would ask each other questions of, do you love me or something like that. But we were pretty open about, hey, I'm feeling this way right now, and I don't know if I'm picking it up correctly or incorrectly. And I think for me, because as a child, I tried so often to read my father's mind, or it wasn't that, because I didn't really know how to talk to him, right? And I realized all that mind reading was really doing nothing. So when I found, let's say, my strength, and within that anger, I was also going to let people know what I need, right? She put me in my place where I learned how it was love. Love is what's the sustainable fuel, not anger. Anger can move you. It can certainly move you, but it's not going to carry you.
Beautiful.
And I just so many things. She was remarkable. Um, Unfortunately, right before her 31st birthday, she was diagnosed with late stage breast cancer. And this was back in the late 90s. Nobody's at fault. She had a lump in her breast. No one did a biopsy or anything because she had cystic breasts. It ran in her family. She was too young at that time to be considered for breast cancer. And it just so happened that I had taken a job in Abu Dhabi. I was recruited by the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, and she was doing an MD PhD. So she was finishing up her PhD, and she said, you know what, when I finish my PhD, let me come out and live with you and I'll take a sabbatical. And so to live in the Emirates, you have to go through a medical screening. And they went the extra mile because it was government, whatever, and diagnosed her. That changed so much. But one of the things I realized, and our story is extremely unusual because she was in medical school and because she was a very strong woman and she knew who she was and what her coping mechanisms were, she didn't want to know anything about her disease. So she said, Robert, you handle everything. So I was the person that spoke to the doctor. She just went, got her treatment, walked away. She didn't want to know anything. She was very clear on how she wanted to manage the disease, what quality of life was, what she was and was not willing to deal with. So she set boundaries for me, parameters. But I was the one that was, let's say, the middle person. But it was in that moment I realized, wow, am I completely blessed for having grown up the way I grew up. Because you know what? I know how to deal with uncertainty. I know about resilience. I know how to manage these things. I have grit. Like all these things that I still didn't have the words for them, but I knew I had the resources inside because of the way I grew up.
You're capable. And so what is amazing about those moments is where you understand the universal gift without excusing the behaviors. So it's like, I can understand it. I can have compassion. I don't have to approve of. And yeah, I love that it was a moment of like, wait a minute, this was not all for naught. Like this, like, those ahas were like, I get it. And just a comment, because this is going to be coming out in October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Everybody get your checkups. But for those of you that are dancing with breast cancer, I lost my very best friend during COVID to breast cancer. Those who are dancing with breast cancer, it's your dance. It doesn't have to be a fight. You don't have to go down the rabbit hole and learn everything about your disease. You can, if that brings you comfort. But what I love is that you were able to give her permission to shut down the doctor brain, the PhD brain, because it so depersonalizes it, and for her to just live the human experience of it. And you to be willing to take over that part is also such a gift. Honey, you be human and you go through that, you do you, and you don't have to be both doctor and human at the same time. You don't have to rob yourself of this experience. With mastery, you can live in the mystery. And I talk a lot about, we're so good at mastery, it's how we handle everything. The mystery is where it's at, folks. The ability to get out of the mastery and just say, I do not know. I feel uncertain, and here I am, and I'm willing.
Yeah. A lot of times we fool ourselves as well with the mastery.
Yeah. If I can
Because
just figure this out, I can somehow heal myself, which a lot of people die with a ton of knowledge about their disease, but
yeah,
they
and
don't
not
die
just
with closure
disease.
in their relationships.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not just disease. It's everything. We fool ourselves into mastery in a way being some sort of armor that will protect us. But there is no way we can. The weather people can't forecast the weather, so leave alone that we can forecast our lives, right? But
It's an illusion of certainty. During
yeah,
COVID, I had a lot of physicians I worked with in healthcare. They're like, I used to know what I was going to see or how to treat things. I'm like, that always was an illusion.
yeah,
Things just lined up more with what you expected, but you never knew.
yeah, 100%. And with Des, she had always been that way. So an example is she didn't know her GPA from university. She didn't know her MCAT scores. She taught me about doing your best and no self-judgment.
I
And so
love that.
for
I still
her,
haven't read my New York Times review of my latest book. It's driving people nuts. They're like, you should read it. And I'm like, I cannot. I'm very much like her in this. I'm like, it doesn't matter. And it will affect me adversely. And so I just know there's some information I do not need.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And The thing about, because I love to throw this in about best, because it's a word that creates a lot of anxiety. Today, your best may be 10%. Tomorrow, it might be 100. But your best is your intention to show up and do what you can. And so with Des, for example, or with me I, this was the other thing. I was not necessarily her caregiver because she was extremely independent. I managed all the stuff and she worked up until 2 weeks before she passed away. She also became the founding director of palliative care at New York Hospital while having metastatic breast cancer. Uh,
Wow.
and
Called leaving a legacy.
that was leaving a legacy. That was us working together. I was willing to leave work and sort of be her everything, let's say, to help her achieve that. Because I learned, and I define it this way, I learned that purpose is when your passions come in alignment with your values.
Say
And you
that one
want
more
to
time.
give the
That's so good.
results away. So when your passions come in alignment with your values and you want to give the results away, you're not looking for the glory. And it was just sitting there in front of me that, wow, maybe it was going to be chronic and she was going to live forever. And at some point in time, I'd have to think about my own life. But I was helping somebody achieve their dreams. That's what brought me into life coaching and everything else. But we lived a remarkable life together. We learned about the present moment. We learned that it's only when you value the ordinary moments that you live an extraordinary life. It's all in the ordinary moments. It's not the five-star. I don't remember the five-star hotels. I don't remember any of that stuff. I remember her laughing at friends and playing with the dog, or, Christmas, her being giddy, whatever the case was. But we learned about the present moment. We learned about joy. We learned about play. We learned about allowing ourselves to be almost childish, but not childish as in irrational or reckless, but childish as in whimsical and really enjoying all of this around us. And we
So
just,
many people have tucked that part of them away. It's like an exile. When you get that level of comfort and intimacy, it's like just being fine with those parts of us coming out to play, knowing that there's freedom and protection there.
yeah, 100%. I mean, we are playing animals at the end of the day. You know, we are meant to play. And there's a lot that's involved in that as well. I love research on play, but to speed up let's say the story about Des and I, well, unfortunately, and she never used the word battle as well, by the way. She defined it her own way.
Yeah,
And
my friend did too. She hated the fight and she lost the fight. She's like, F you. I didn't lose no freaking fight. I
yeah,
danced a beautiful dance. And other people who are fighting, if that is your way, bless you. I'm not condemning or
right. No.
praising. But language to my Kathy, as people read about in my book, was so important. And she's like, I'm not going to fight and be your hero. It's just, I'm
Yeah,
not even interested in that. I want to play. I want to goof off. I want to dance.
yeah. It's all an individual experience. I mean, everything is an individual experience at the end of the day because we're all individuals. We're all unique. Um, Real diversity comes from approaching life our way. Now, of course, you don't want to do harm to other people, and that's morality, and everything else is a different thing. But you know, Desiree did not like to call it a battle or a fight. She didn't want breast cancer books. She wasn't into wearing the pink and everything else. She's like, I'm not defined by the disease that right now I'm confronting.
Yeah, I'm not dying from breast cancer. I'm living, and I happen to have breast cancer and
Ex-
a blue
yeah,
car.
yeah,
Like, it's
ex-
just,
exactly. Um, so there was a point in time where her oncologist called me into his office, and he never ever did. So I knew what it was going to be. And it was funny because he said to me, you know what, this is when we would recommend hospice, because hospice people confuse hospice and palliative care. Hospice is the last stage. Palliative care should be from the beginning of a disease, a chronic disease. It doesn't have to be terminal. So,
and hospice doesn't equal death, it equals your last developmental stage, which
yes,
is active. I wrote in my book, a lot of people think adolescence is a developmental stage and then adult. But at the end of our lives, we have closure and reconciliation. We have developmental things to do. Hospice can help with that if that's your path. But I love what you said, just for our listeners to learn, if you or a family member is offered palliative care, hopefully it's at the moment of diagnosis because they help you figure out your way through that without having to deal with, symptoms that aren't well managed. And if you're offered hospice, that isn't like you're giving up. That means that you would like a different partner in the work you have yet to do. There's just so much tied to both of those. I see people refusing such beautiful services, and it breaks my heart because I'm like, you've connected this, it means that, and that's your story. It doesn't mean that. It just means you're offered some services.
100%. And the services are primarily based on quality of life during that phase.
And that you define. That's the
Yes.
thing. It's like, some of the greatest palliative care docs are, tell me what's important to you. Tell me what's quality to you. And then we'll work from that map.
Yeah. In fact, Desiree's an oncologist who wasn't a palliative care doctor, but actually approached it that way as well, and got her finally to admit that what she really wanted was more energy to do her job. And he was like, we could work with that. So, he couldn't prevent death. He's like, we'll do everything possible, but I'm not God. So
we're
what
changing our
can I
goals
help
now.
you?
We're not preventing death, but tell me what success
Yeah.
now looks like to you.
So, but anyway, a little off topic, but
Not at all off topic,
okay.
because what we go through in life, and part of what I believe is the play of the ego, we separated that personal from work, and we said, well, here's professional development and here's personal development. And what we ended up with is professional development is very conventional and it's very incremental. It's not exponential. If we look at post-rigorous or post-conventional thinking, we can't look at just professional development. We have to look at the personal, and it's not just development, it's evolutionary. So my listeners have heard me, I'm on this rant about evolutionary experiences, whether it's psychedelic assisted therapy or whether it's helping integrate the death experience you went through, which wasn't just a day your wife died, but the years before and the years after and the rest of your life, how you integrate and evolve from that. That's the work we're called to do right now. And it's not even just merging personal and professional. So you're not off topic. If we are talking about life, the sense we make of it, how we integrate it, and how it involves us, and we can extend an invitation to others and hold more space for them to do that, we are so on topic. So
Fantastic. Okay, excellent. I absolutely love it. So, as he called me into the office, told me about hospice, and said, "Well, but that's not Desiree." And I said, "No, we cannot offer her hospice. What's an alternative?" He said, "You become her hospice." And I did. I learned how to flush a port. I learned how to connect things. I learned a lot of things. And she rallied. She rallied, and she gave this
because it was
amazing
like
speech.
care plus love, like the best combo. It's like when
Yeah,
somebody cooks you food, the food doesn't have to be good, but it's like the love in it. That's
it's
the
the love of it.
Italian part.
It's 100% the Italian part. I was sprinkling in all kinds of ingredients, and she rallied. So she wound up living maybe another 18 months, which was shocking to everybody. Nobody understood how this was happening. But finally, she went into the hospital for bowel obstruction, and there came a point in time, and this is how active she was. She never wanted to talk about death. That was part of there were a few things. We had a fight when we were very young, and I called her an idiot. And I think she was 19 and I was probably 20. It's the last time I ever used that word. That was one of those words that was not allowed, right? So death was also like not allowed. We weren't going to talk about that. And she just looked at me and she said, "Robert, I'm tired." And I said, "Okay, baby, rest." And I knew what she was telling me. And I asked them to transition to comfort care. She never woke up. After she told me that, she went to sleep and she was in a coma. So that was the last conversation we had.
No, after she told you that and you gave her permission,
And I gave her permission. Or
then she went to sleep.
yeah, or maybe it was she wanted, yeah,
Acceptance,
acceptance maybe of,
not
look,
permission.
I love you so much, because I know she was doing it for me as much as she was doing it for her. Everything she went through. She basically had chemotherapy every other Friday for 11 years. She had surgeries. She had all kinds of things. I mean, there were just,
Well,
but
MD, PhD, palliative care
yes.
program. And this isn't about heroics, folks, when you're living it from your purpose. And I want to just separate that out, because people look at transactional things like how many hours somebody works. They're a workaholic. They're not on purpose. They should find their life. No, if you looked at my life and you tried to say, where's the work-life balance? It depends. Am I doing this out of duty? Am I doing this for achievement or accolades? Or am I doing this because I couldn't think of a single other thing I would love to do with the time I have left on earth? And so just to make that case, because I see we're so quick to name things, which we lose our perspective. And it's how would I know? If I look at somebody who works up to the day they die, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're such a workaholic. Don't name it. Ask them a few more questions. Stay curious.
Stay curious. Like you said, the value of questions. There's also, you use that word, work-life balance. What I found is when you're in harmony with your purpose and with yourself, when you know yourself, it flows.
And the
that's
question
really
hardly even comes up.
that's what I saw from her. I saw she was flowing through what she was doing. She just, it empowered her, but then her body just couldn't, deal with it any longer. And I was left with, let's say, a lack of purpose all of a sudden. Everything was, it became her in a way. I lived her disease because I had to make decisions as well, about, I knew what was going on. She didn't. She thought she only had it, metastasized in her liver. It was all over, but she didn't need to know that. She just had to know about the liver, because unfortunately we had to take some of her liver out. There was no way to hide it. So, but then I defaulted immediately to that childhood trigger of safety. Safety is money. Money made me safe. Money got me away from my dad. I had tons of debt to pay off, but regardless, that was what I went to. And as soon as I arrived back in Dubai in investment banking, I was out of sync. I was out of harmony. You talked earlier about, was it resist? No, tension, friction,
Yeah.
a drawer and friction. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt right at all, but I didn't know where I belonged. And that's when I started to really understand loss and change. And I started doing a lot of work on my own. It was my identity. Yes, I lost her. I love her. I loved her. She was not there anymore. But my identity, who I was, the expectations I had for my life, it all wasn't there anymore. So I say all the time that loss is a lack of self and security. The world seemed very scary, and I didn't know who I was in the world anymore.
And if we're not careful, we'll try and go back to the familiar. We'll recreate, I know for me, as I came out of my second marriage and was just devastated, I went right back, almost forgot what I had learned from my therapy in my 20s and recreated like kind of my family of origin, like basically married someone very similar to my father, but who I thought had all the good qualities and none of the bad qualities. And just for those of you that are just feeling lost, be very careful the plans you grab onto or not, because you'll figure it out. You'll go do that.
Yeah.
You'll go back to Saudi Arabia, wherever you went, to Dubai and Emirates, and you'll figure it out. Like, you don't have to know, but it's just a good time to ask some questions. How am I just about to ignore red flags and ignore inner feelings and grab on to something familiar?
100%. And Oprah has that quote about life whispers to you, and if you don't listen to the whisper, it's a brick upside your head, and if you don't listen to the brick, the wall falls down.
Yeah.
And
I usually wait for the wall, and then I'm like, I think we can work with this. I wanted to open the plan anyway.
I was sitting there, and I was feeling it, and I was hearing it, and I was ignoring it as well. And then something that I talk to my clients about, I started to daydream. And that's that whole allowing yourself to play, being a little, childish is not the right, childlike, being childlike. Isn't that what's Einstein quote, something about like childlike enthusiasm or something like that. But I started daydreaming of, well, you know what? I need to start over. And part of that, I think, also comes from, again, the childhood, understanding the boundaries, understanding, let's say, in a way, I was in control of my life. And you mentioned earlier about, and I'm going to paraphrase here because it's not exactly what you said. You don't have to accept the behaviors or condone the behaviors. So my dad, at some point in time, reached out to me. He was married to my mom. I mean, we saw each other all the time, but I just, hello, goodbye, that was it. Reached out to me, and he wrote me a letter and said, I would like to restart a relationship and so forth. And I was in my mid 20s, I guess, or late 20s. And I wrote him back and I said, write me a few more letters and prove to me you've changed.
What
And
a beautiful response.
I will step forward. He never wrote me another letter. So
yeah, wow, what a risk to use your voice. And we have to be okay with the answer as it comes. Like, the hardest part for me to set boundaries or ask good questions, I have to get clear for myself, because otherwise I'm not setting boundaries. But then I have to ask for what I need and be willing, if the answer isn't what I wanted, to have the heartbreak, to grieve the grief.
yeah, what I've learned to do, and what I talk about, is the power comes from asking, from actually showing up in life, because we're communicating to whatever energetic life this is. We're communicating, we're here. And so I think what started to happen, the whole daydreaming thing and everything else, is I started seeing all the times that things didn't work, but somehow they eventually did work out. And I started to be curious, and I asked myself a new question. And it wasn't about risk or failure. It was about, okay, if this is a starting point, what if I can pull off my dreams?
I love that.
And that was the question I moved forward with. And it doesn't mean everyone has to pick up and go move to a different country, but I had always had a dream of living in Italy. And in a way, I think, because, financially, I already experienced, a lot of difficulty. I lost the woman I loved. I grew up the way I did. I see, what is the worst thing that can happen? I'll wind up being a 50-year-old man living with my mother. My dad's long since passed away. So I packed my 2 suitcases and I showed up in Rome. I didn't speak Italian. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't know anyone. I'm just like, okay, I'm here. What's next? And it was that whole wonder, wow, let me see this unfold.
Follow my
And
curiosity.
all my curiosity. And I said to myself, wow, you know what? I looked at the situation with Desiree. And I say all the time, she is a beautiful scar on my heart. I mean, it's a beautiful scar. It's a beautiful scar, and it glows. I know it glows. But I looked at what happened with her, and I said, well, what is it I miss about me? Not about the relationship, but what do I miss about me in that relationship? That's what drew me to
What
life coaching.
a fantastic question, which is why you're a fantastic life coach. And people, a lot of my audience called me for life coaching. I'm saying, like, so not your girl. But if your ears are perking up, we will tell you how to get a hold of our guests. Like, amazing. What, because so many of us miss the relationship or the fantasy of the relationship. But what a question. What do I miss about me in that relationship?
Well, that's that whole thing about identity, right? It's I miss who I was. I miss the way I felt. What things brought me that feeling?
That
And I
aliveness, that
realized,
savoring the moment, that
yeah,
giggling like a kid, that, the things that you described were so beautiful.
yeah. I mean, she was absolutely incredible on every spectrum imaginable for me, but it wasn't the person. It was the interaction. It was the connection.
What
It
it
was the
brought out in
intimacy. It
you,
was, yeah, there were so many different things. And I said,
like who you
wow,
were in relationship to a good partnership, whether that's a partnership with life or a partnership with Des or a partnership with business or a
yeah,
client.
yeah, 100%. And so that's how I wound up becoming a life coach and getting my life coaching certificate. And because, as they say, so I live in Abruzzo because I'm part Abruzzese. I'm also part Sicilian. But in Abruzzo, they say that you're hard-headed, testardo. And I sort of am because I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to life coaching school and I'm going to do it in Italian so I can force myself to learn Italian. And so let's say it was a bit of a challenge. It was a big, bite to chew, but I definitely got through it. And what what I found in the process is that, and we spoke about this earlier about being artists of our own life. I was in Rome one day, and I wrote about this in my book. I was in Rome, and I was in a beautiful church called San Clemente, and it has this incredible mosaic floor. And I was just sitting there, just looking at the floor. And the longer I looked at it, I realized that all the pieces are imperfect. But as a whole, the imperfections are what give depth and beauty to the mosaic. So all these imperfections, all these things we think we did wrong or went wrong, they're all part of this beautiful creation. And the image came to my mind of I am creating my life. I'm not living my life. It's not predetermined, predestined. I'm just going down the track. Actually, I am creating it. The events happen. I decide what those events mean. Yes, of course, you know, financial hardship, been there, done that. Hurts. It's horrible. Lost my wife, my dad. They're not things we would want. But if we don't ask ourselves, what can I use this for? We're then used by it.
Oh, I love that. What can we use this for? We're used by it. Like, how do we make sense of it and integrate it? Um, and I love that realization of creation, because a lot of people want to live like perfectly, like clean up the mess or make sure that they can get an A on the test. And then they say, I just don't feel like my life is very rich. And it's like, well, you're living 1D. If you want to live 3D, you have to put a big and in there. I am going to be devastated and energized. And, we are not one personality individuals. We're multi-personality individuals. We're
Yes.
multi-dimensional, but we reject so much of the dimensions that don't fit up to the perfect. And therefore, it just looks like a machine-made floor that somebody laser cut, and we would never be in awe of a laser cut floor in that beautiful church. It was the mosaic.
Yeah. Well, it's the you have a great way of putting this all together, which I absolutely love. The the idea of the mess, right? Because you use that word a few times, and I love that word. I love this idea of messy, because any
My last
art
book
you
was
make
Life's Messy, Live Happy. Life
happily,
doesn't need to
yeah,
be perfect for you to be content. But I've always used the word, like, when I was a little kid, I would say, this is unfixable. It's such a mess. And then in my own healing, I had to say, this is just a glorious mess, and it doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be lived.
exactly. That's sort of where I was going, right? It needs to be lived. We're not meant to straighten, at least this is the way I feel. We're not meant to straighten things up. We're meant to get our hands dirty and use it and create it into something else. It's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. And partly because we have this, and I mentioned the word earlier, and I never really even talked about this whole idea, admiration and comparison. We have this idea of comparison and wanting everything to be perfect, or like we see in certain magazines or on Instagram or whatever the case is. And that's some sort of symbol of we belong, and
Or we are worthy.
or we
And
are
we
worthy.
want the world to accept that we're worthy when we haven't accepted
It,
that we're
we're,
worthy. And folks listening, this isn't about like a toxic positivity. I'm not pressuring you to take things that have caused a variety of emotions and be like, oh, but it happened for the better because, or, like Desiree's in a better place. It's like BS. Like, this is a meditative practice of sitting until you can see each of these imperfections. Like a mosaic, if you're up close to it, you have to step back and you have to look at that. It's like, what is this? Oh, I see it. And it's a meditative practice, and it's a way of training your eyesight to see differently. One of my dearest friends is a mosaic artist. She's amazing. And I watch her work and I'm like, I have no idea what this is going to be. And then all of a sudden I'm like, holy heck, like
yeah,
it's something so beautiful. But that meditative practice is like, you really have to live your way into the questions. You have to sit with questions in meditative ways. I love walking with questions. Like, I'll pick a question and just walk with it for months or days, or and that's why self-reflection is important. Self-reflection, not to figure yourself out and know, but self-reflection to invite yourself inward to see from many angles.
yes. That would get us to the word possibility. But what I want to pick up on what you said, because it is so important. Um, I was sad, depressed, angry, frustrated. I went through so much in terms of, these things are, you don't want these things to happen. But this is the way I sort of think about it in my own mind, right? It's not the toxic positivity that we have to say everything is okay. I can look at it now and understand a lot about it. But that's because I picked it up, I looked at it, I felt it, I could feel the weight. I played with it until I didn't need it anymore. I didn't put it in a knapsack, because imagine if we put all those things in a knapsack,
Heavy,
by
heavy.
a certain age, forget about it. We can't even walk, right?
But
So
it's like a lot of us aren't that good at feeling and embodying and somatically just even embracing it until the body digests it and, like, excretes it. I love that, where it's like you're not carrying it around. And some people pause there. Some people put it in their backpack, and when you meet them, in the first 10 minutes that they're, grieving this and this happened to them. Other people find a way to digest it, to convert it into its rightful place in who we are.
yeah, I think some of that also comes from a question I asked myself during that whole process as well, is I asked myself, do I like myself? Do I love myself? Because I was very lost, right? Personally, I was very lost. Everything changed. And
Boy, those are brave questions.
hard questions, hard but brave. What I realized is it wasn't the answer that was so important. It was, if the answer was yes, then that means, as hard as it is, there's a type of gratitude for everything that happened in my life because it made me who I am. If the answer was no, I had to understand what was under my control to change about what I didn't like about myself. I brought it back to me in terms of, it's not life happening to me. It's how I'm reacting and what am I taking in and using in the wrong way. It was,
It also shows you what I don't like about myself. What have I exiled with a critique or lack of compassion, that I could realize what was in my control, what wasn't, or what the setup was perhaps, and how I can find some self-forgiveness is
yeah,
another direction with some of those answers. But the power is in the questions. Resolution always happens for us, whether we want it or not, unless we don't ask the question. So if you ask the question and there's a myriad of answers, if you just keep pondering the question, resolution will happen. The order of the natural world wants resolution. It wants it to like figure out a way to like live symbiotically. We're the one that fights that.
yes, 100%. I also found that at the times that I was really, really down, let's say, and I was an observer, right? And I was looking at myself being down, but I was like, how do I get out of this? And this is going to bring me back to admiration, because when I was a kid, what I started doing is I would read a lot, and I, had friends that had great dads, and I would look at them as role models. And I learned how to think, I admire this person. How do these people behave? I want to be like that. So when I was in a place and I couldn't figure it out, like, I can't get out of this funk, I'd ask myself, well, what would somebody I admire do right now?
Oh, what a great question.
It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you perk back up,
Because
but
sometimes the answer is lay here and cry.
yeah,
Like sometimes the answer is the person I admire feels feelings, or, it's not just who do I admire because they ignore what happened to them and they carry on no matter what.
right, 100%. And what it does is it shifts, it broadens your perspective. That's what this whole thing about possibility or possibility in action is, what I use to define my own personal philosophy of moving through things is, I'm here. It's a dark, nasty, stinky place. But if I just look at my feet, I'm going to be here forever. And so what is it? What is the practice? And everyone has their own practices, and meditation, mindfulness. It could be exercising, it could be hiking, it could be whatever it is. And there's no time frame. That's what we were talking about. Best, right? Some people might take 10 years. Some people, it might take one day. Whatever the case is, respect yourself and your own time. But ask yourself if you're living the life you want to live, because you don't want to be stuck looking at your feet. But if you ask, yes, I am, I'm just not there yet, and you keep moving towards possibilities, that's the action, right? And I found it so incredible because I realized that was what my whole life had always been about, was moving towards possibilities. You have to learn, there's so many things involved in that, right? you need to discern. And I have a big thing about judgment and discerning, and I talk about this. Discerning is not, let's put it this way, judging something or someone is saying that thing or person is wrong. Discerning is saying it's not right for me.
For me, I love that you made that distinction.
And it's so important because we do get to choose. We just have to understand, what is it that, what's the metric we're using to choose? And what I learned after Des passed away, and I was going through that whole cycle of thinking of what I would do and daydreaming. I'm in Italy because I had a vision of what I wanted my life to be, and I reverse engineered it.
I love that. I love the reverse engineering part and the possibility in action. I talk a lot about the difference between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth, and the research which suggests that one of the differences is that someone who you trust, who is a leader, could be yourself, your highest self, comes in and says, we have appropriate time for empathy, grieving, let's hold space for that. And at the appropriate time says, but let's imagine multiple positive possibilities. And what if we managed our energy away from why we can't or how stuck we are to what if we could? And that very active energy management of one, imagining possibilities, and two, managing energy in that direction is what spoke to me so much in your own language about possibilities in action. For me over COVID, and I think for many of us, we've all had our moments of our death moments, whether it's losing, a beautiful spouse, or realizing our childhood impacted us in ways we didn't think, or COVID, or losing a job, or, whatever. Over COVID, I had a moment where I lost a marriage, I lost my best friends, our work was gone. My kids had all left the house. Like, it was just like loss after loss after loss. My sister passed away, my nephew was killed in a car accident. It was just like, but those walls falling in instead of the whisper. I remember feeling blissful, and it was that haiku, my barn burnt down, now I can see the moon.
Yes.
And it was just like, that was my imagining. I'm like, wait a minute. I have done such a good job eating as if life were a smorgasbord. I took from my choices and I enjoyed every meal, even if it's not exactly what I had from what a smorgasbord offered. I took beautiful vacations. I had a life I loved vacations from. And I thought, well, wait a minute. What if I create a life I don't need to vacation from? And what if I imagined my choices weren't just the smorgasbord, but I actually could create the menu? And I started thinking, if I could curate a life, what would I curate? Like, if I could design my own life, what would it be? And I didn't even know. And I had to look back, like, what did I love as a child? I loved making things. I loved music. I loved communities of people. I went to like every Bible school of every religion I could find, not because I loved Jesus, but I loved I craved spiritual conversation. And I started to just put this together and really think about the questions. And I was asking horrible questions, like, should I stay? Should I go? Should I try and resurrect this marriage, or should I not? Like, what? And I realized they were horrible questions. What does my soul crave? Was a
Yes.
better question. Just like you said, what do I miss about myself? And my soul craved, once I got clear on it, craved more of this and less of that. Then I'm like, what am I afraid of? Just like, go create that. And then the next question came, am I willing for people to be wrong about me to live the life I want to live? Like, self-help guru who chooses to leave, a marriage. And then once I got really clear for what my soul craved, and I was willing to risk the answer, because the power is in the asking, I went to the people in my life and I asked them these questions, and I had to believe the answer they gave me, which was a lot of heartbreak. It was like, my dad didn't write back in your case. This person said, actually, no, that's not what I want. And some of my employees said, I want something different. And I'm like, I had to really be okay with that. And so I love this possibility in action and reflection and contemplation and really thinking about, instead of trying to figure out why did they do that, figure out like why I stayed for that, or like what do I crave and what am I working to achieve? Because I also found out, we talked about before we pushed play, so many times I would go out and my goal was achievement. So I would ask questions and people would give me a lot of advice because I had said my goal is achievement, and that's what I had asked. So achievement was, so if you want to be successful, lose weight, dye your hair, don't be as brass, you know, like, here's how you can become CEO someday. And it was all this like executive presence, like dress differently, quit being so woo-woo. And at first I was mad. I'm like, I can't believe these people don't want me to show up authentically. But see, I was asking them how I could achieve. And when I took their answers, I achieved. I started asking other questions like, how can I live the life of my dreams? And when I asked the same people who are experts in achievement that question, they're like, I don't know. Why are you asking me? And I realized I had the wrong people.
Yeah.
Then I am in the process right now of accumulating like a different tribe. And now when I ask people this, they're like, oh, they can't tell me the answer, but they can point, you know, to the moon. They're like, I would look that way.
Yeah.
And they're more willing to live in the mystery with me. They're less nervous about my lack of concrete plans. They're like, they're okay with me doing, you know, crazy things, because they're not invested in my achievement. They don't have anything to win or lose. The people I'm starting to be around now are very invested in my happiness. And they know that that's free for everybody, which
Well,
changes
yeah.
your relationships. You know, if you're asking the question, will you marry me so we can have kids? You're successful when you have kids. It's a different question. Will you travel the world with me and talk about what we see? Very different question.
So true. You know, just you mentioned like traveling the world and talking with me. There's an old movie called Before Sunrise, and that was what I thought a relationship, or that's the relationship Des and I had in a way, but that's what I thought a relationship should be. It's the talking. It's the talking about what you're seeing, and that was always so important to me, which is one of the things that was hard when after she passed away, because I'm like, well, who do I talk to, right? Like, I'm not going to go travel anymore because why should I travel? And then I realized, no, it was the experience. Yes, the sharing of, but the experience was so important. The idea of as we grow, we grow out of ourselves as we grow. So logically, it will mean, which is a difficult transition, that we also grow out of a tribe to a certain extent. And we have different questions, and therefore there's different people to be around. And I'm very much like you in this situation where I had to start like looking and finding other people, because my my tribe was, Robert, what are you doing? You're crazy. What are you going to go move to Italy for? There's no way you're going to create a big business. And of course, the American brain was like, oh, yeah, you know, I have to have like, I don't know, 60 coaches underneath me, and I have to be global, and I have to do this. And you use the word curating, and I use the word right sizing my life. I looked at, well, what is it? How do I want to live? Not what do I want to have. First, how do I want to live? And the fact is, we'll never die finished. We will never die having achieved everything. So, how can we sort of make a mistake pursuing how we want to live, how we want to show up in the world, who we want to be, how we express ourselves? Um, I share something which I don't think it's necessarily controversial, but you know, the idea of coming out has been attributed now to sexuality. But we're all meant to come out to who we are. It's more about self-uality, even though I don't
I
think that's a
love
word,
that.
but I put that in my book as self-uality, because that's get to know ourselves and live what's in harmony with that. I live a much different life than my friends, and I was in the United States recently, and I didn't necessarily need to go and sit at a five-star restaurant or Michelin, whatever. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm really good with barbecue because it's about being with you and the conversation. It's not all this other stuff. And I
And what's
think,
enough? I think a great question is like, what is enough, which changes it. And the coming out, I love that, because when we finally use our voice and say, actually, this is my secret dream, or this is the life I dream of living, or this is something I want to do, and it may or may not work. Most people that love us, even if they're a tribe we're about to graduate, most people, it's like a non-issue. I've had some people do the big coming out to me from a sexuality standpoint. And I know, and my heart breaks when people are met with, parents that their
yeah,
protectors come out and they're disappointed. But how many times we sit and fear the coming out, and it's really a non-issue. It's like, oh, thank God we have that covered, because like, let's move on and
yeah,
get about supporting you in the life you choose to live. Um, Even the people that condemn us are supporting us. And that was a new perspective for me. Is I had an experience in high school. I was elected homecoming candidate as a joke, like to like mock me. And I always saw that as like a heart-shattering moment. And now I see that as a grateful moment, because had people said you are welcome here, I would have stayed. I'm the girl I would have married like a beautiful farmer. I'd be a stay-at-home mom. I would can my own vegetables, and I would have been happy, but I wouldn't have given some of the things I've been able to give to the world. And in
yeah,
my first marriage, if that hadn't fallen apart so dramatically, where I realized, his sexuality was something other than presented in the 20 years of our marriage, I'm like, that was heart shattering. But he basically was saying, do not stay in Sioux City, Iowa, go forth. And as each of these things changed, and now I sit in the Baja doing podcasts like this with incredible guests, writing books, living what is for today the best life I've got figured out so far. It's my home. And I would have never gotten to my home if I didn't have so many people clearly say, this is not your home.
yes,
And all of a sudden that hit me, where I'm just like, thank you, high school. Thank you, family. Thank you, husband number one. Thank you, husband number, like, thank you. Thank
yeah,
you, boss who drove me up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I used to say, oh, all things happen for a purpose, toxic positivity. Now I say, oh my gosh, thank you. Because I needed people to clearly say, not your home, for me to, like a pinball machine that like knocks you back and forth till you come
yeah.
out the chute, like to say, here's your home. Here it is. And it's just, I don't know what got started on that, but I love that place where you're just like, let's do the coming out, the self-uality is what you called it.
Yeah,
Like only when we got honest with, this isn't working, was I able to know myself and come out in a way, and I got my answer.
yeah,
And part of what happened in high school was punishment for when I really got real with who I was. And people are like, freak. And when I really got real in other situations and I came out, it didn't mean the world applauded, but the world certainly right-sized me for the life I was trying to right-size.
one, yes. And the whole idea of all these things, right? Life provides us so much contrast, but I think it's only when we step into knowing ourselves that we can make sense of the contrast. You probably now you feel home, you know you're home. If you were more in touch with this side back then, right? you could have said early on, you know what, yeah, this is not right for me. That's not right for me. The discerning aspect of it.
Exactly. And not right for me right now. I think I would add that discernment is it's not right for me right now, which gives us permission to discern more in our life. Like,
Yeah.
so I really want to make sure people take they'll love this podcast. And I love the actionable stuff. And your book possibly is an action, and even just your website, your keynote speaking, your retreats, your life coaching. One, where can people find you? And we'll put that in the show notes. But two, if you put together kind of the life coaching, you have a wonderful path you take people on, or a process, whatever you want to add that takes all that you've shared, which is so amazing, down to here are some concrete, maybe practical, I don't want to say things to do, but invitations that that you can have for people. We've got about 10 minutes left. It would be fun to just hear that.
Sure. Well, first, they can definitely reach me at robertpardi.com. So that's the easiest thing.
It's
Uh,
Pardi, right?
DI, Pardi. Yes. And, I originally, it's funny, I originally had, let's say, a process, which was, it was an acronym DRIVE. It starts with discovery and it goes to execution.
But
But
evolution
everyone,
doesn't always work that way.
yeah, exactly. And it sounds all nice, but at the end of the day, of course, it really depends on the client. One of the things I'm not insistent on, but I tell everyone to do is, even if you don't know what to write about, journaling is so important.
And if you don't
And
know where to start, morning pages that are described in the Artist's Way, which is a book, folks, like
oh
are
yeah,
amazing, because you don't have to know what to write about and you don't have to edit it. There's no finished product. You just are involved in the act.
yeah. I have, like, let's say, some questions that I'll ask myself, because while I'm a believer in why, I don't think we should stay in a archaeological dig. And there has to be a point in
Amen.
time that we move to, so what's next, or what do we do? But if you start journaling and you take a look at your journal. Now, I write really, really small, so I can never read what I write anyway, because I write very, very fast. It's sort of like a brain dump. But you'll see how your handwriting changes based on your mood and your emotion. It's
Interesting.
so important to get the emotion out through that process of writing. That will not happen with a keyboard. Maybe if you record your voice, but I'm a big believer in writing. And so a lot of times I say, write with curiosity. You know, I wonder why, I didn't really feel comfortable about this that happened today. I wonder why. Think about what it means and everything like that. What could I have done differently? What could I learn from this?
Or there's a part of me hesitant, go inside, like if that
Yes.
part were talking to me, what would they say? And just write on their behalf.
And exactly. Um, my journaling practice, when I was a kid, I would write, but it wasn't really journaling, but it was more trying to understand everything that was going on in my life. But after I read Conversations with God, I started journaling in that way,
Oh,
because I'm a spiritual person. I'm not necessarily a religious person, and I believe that he was speaking to his higher self in that book.
and the higher self is speaking back.
Yes. And we have that connection. We've forgotten about it. But that connection is there, especially when we're a kid. We are very connected to so many different things. But so I believe that you should journal. Yes, the why is interesting, but it's also more asking the what's. What does this mean? What can I use it for?
What sense can I make of that?
And this, yeah. Um,
I love that. And people that follow me know we talk a lot about why questions are ineffective instead of why doesn't anyone tell me anything? What can I do to get better information? It brings it out of the work of the ego and the intellect into like the practicality, the possibly in action. It brings the action part in.
It brings the action part in. I'm also a very big believer in nature. And it's not necessarily just being in nature, which is great, but actually just looking at nature. And what I mean by that is notice the mess, notice the imperfections, notice everything, but it all works, it all functions. And remember, we're part of it. So I ask people a lot of times when we first start working is for them to just find some place that they could walk around a little bit and just sort of be still and look at nature,
And
and receive.
The metaphor, the example. I have a similar assignment. I call it hiking as a metaphor. I have people come up with a question. We perfect the question, not to be perfect, but to get it out of why. And I'll have them go out and find something in nature and look at it and see how that creation through its living example answers the question. And one time I was struggling with one of my kids, and everybody's like, you have to be so strong and don't enable and you have tough love. And it never felt right. And I did that for myself. And I went out and I found this columbine flower that caught my attention. I sat and looked at it, and the stem was so sturdy. It was square. It was almost woody. And the flower was so loving and like stunning and beautiful and delicate. And in that, I just found my answer. Like, I need to find the and here. I'm his only parent in this moment. And so I need to hold space to be so loving, unconditional. And I need to find the places that I can build a solid kind of foundation for him. I love, you're the only other person I've ever talked to that talks about
Wow.
that
Yeah.
metaphor that we can find in just existing in nature.
It's so important. A few other things um, that I like to do as well is a lot of times people will say this is all really great, but I don't have time. Okay, if you don't have time, why don't you look at your calendar and see how you're spending your time?
Yeah.
Is there something more valuable than finding some things about yourself? Or is there something more valuable to you the way you're spent, because spending time, it actually is a resource, right? We are spending it. We're not going to get it back. So is there something other than you moving towards the life you want?
How am I diverting myself? How am
Yes,
I distracting myself? When when the health crisis first hit of COVID and people thought we'd be home just for a week or two, and that was longer. A question I ask a lot of people is like, what is this revealing to you? What was all that busyness covering up for you? Like what? Because when people say I don't have time, I wonder if the truth is I don't want to look.
I
I'm
don't want to look.
scared at what I would find. It may make me responsible for my own journey. And the victim in me wants to have all this stuff going on so I don't have to own that the life I'm living is the life I, for the most part, am choosing.
Right. We have played a part in the life we've created. It doesn't just happen. Again, it doesn't happen to us, but we might not be thinking consciously. We may have made decisions unconsciously.
Yeah. A great question is what is happening reveal to me about me? And
Yes.
that's another just great journal question. What am I
And
learning about me in this?
what am I learning about me in this? And the other thing that I ask people to do is at the start of this, because if you go down the road of wanting to look inside, and I recently posted that my belief is that life is an inward journey meant to be expressed outward.
Love
It's
that.
inside. It's inside. But
The
if
more
you
wisdom
just
we can forge, the more we can walk through the mess more skillfully and lovingly. We
100,
think it's about figuring out how to walk through skillfully, but you cannot do anything you haven't traveled to internally. And the quantum
yes,
physics would tell you that everything is a hologram. Everything's a projection. Everything is a a projection of the inner part.
Yes. And I've seen that in my own life. So I believe it. But a lot of times to go into that inward space, you feel very vulnerable. And so that's why you need some boundaries. So what I ask people to practice is I say that if someone asks you a question, say to them, give me a day to think about it. Just don't react automatically.
I'll get back to you. And sometimes when you get back
Yeah.
to them, it's, why do you need to know? Or write me a few more letters. Or that's something I'm choosing privacy around right now. Like, we think of all questions deserve answers,
Yeah.
and not all questions deserve answers or deserve answers in the moment.
Yeah, and that gets back to the curiosity and the wonder, right? A lot of times it's just going to lead to another question. There won't be an answer, but it's so important to learn to start to create that space so you're not reactionary in your life.
I
And so
love
those are
that.
little things that I do with some of my clients at the beginning, is just to get them into a space where there's more breath.
There's more breath, there's more space, there's more closing your eyes and checking inward, which is a place we don't go often. There's more, but the good news is it's all there in that marble that the sculptor's working with. Your job isn't as hard as you think. It is more about removing what isn't you, or removing what's not the answer to your question, than trying to figure out the answer. It's a lot more willingness to sit in the mystery while things are revealed to you, rather than the knowing what is the right thing to do. And that comes as big relief to
Yes.
people once we get them. I'll talk for myself. Once I get myself to come, sit, stay, I have to come and I have to settle in. I have to really sit, but I have to stay, because I am one who, like, first answer, I'm like, oh, got the answer. Let's go execute. And I've had such beautiful teachers. They're like, why don't you sit back down and stay a while? Let's.
Exactly. It's so amazing how habitual we are,
Yeah,
right? So
condition. Yep.
if you're not staying, that first answer might have been conditioned by things you don't want anymore. But it's just wearing a different outfit. And so you got to sit with it and wait to see, hey, what is
Does
this
it
really going to
fit?
transform? Does it fit? Yeah, does it feel good? Just there's a beautiful quote that I want to share. It's in my book, and it's a quote I reflect on every day. And so part of my own personal practice is I have in the morning, I have certain quotes that I reflect upon and certain questions that I ask myself about how I want to show up today. And that's part of a stoic practice. I mean, if you really look at it, that was their morning and their evening contemplations. But a quote that I carry with me all the time is by Richard Bach in his book One. And it says, we're all born with a block of marble and the tools to shape it into a sculpture. We can drag it behind us untouched. That's inaction. We can pound it into gravel. Anger. I'm adding the inaction and anger. That's not part of it. We can pound it into gravel. I believe that's anger. Or we can shape it into glory. And that's what I love to reflect upon. And I know for a lot of people, this sounds very woo-hoo, because it's like, oh, life isn't that way. Or think about why you're telling yourself that. What are you avoiding?
Yeah. What are
What
you
are you
keeping
trying to
yourself from knowing?
exactly? So,
Robert, what
but
a fantastic, I love that quote. I read that book, and it's funny how we each have different things we draw out. I end these episodes with assignments, and assignments are go sit with questions. And if you need some help with that, find some people that will guide you in the sitting with some good questions. If you want something a bit different in your life, you've got to ask different questions. If you want something better in your life, as you define it, your best, you've got to ask better questions. Robert, when I got on, I said, we might not take the whole time, and we have taken all of the time we were
Wow.
allowed.
Okay.
It has been, for me, the podcast will publish and perhaps others will benefit. But for me, I feel very reflective, life coached, connected, and higher in consciousness. So I appreciate you and the work that you do. I hope this is the first of many conversations.
Oh, I will be following you to make sure that it's the first of many.
Awesome. Awesome.
So,
Thank you so much
no,
for
thank you.
sharing.